Philosophers talk to our times. It was an old maxim of Keynes, wasn't it? Oh, we citizens of dystopia. An old maxim of Keynes that every idea, it didn't matter how crazy or stupid, ever espoused by some shallow demagogue or some deep politician after your vote, all of them were caught up in the same relationship with academia. That at some point, 20, 30, 40 years before, some academic had written them down, maybe with a slightly different purpose, envisaging them slightly differently. But always, everything begun with an idea and unfurled its grim reality from that idea. And so one of the things our modern dystopia is caught in is in a very strange relationship with the postmodernism of my youth. That postmodernism overthrew any notions of essence or essential thinking. It took from structuralism the idea that you understand things not because they are, but rather in relation, one with the other. And in the hands of great thinkers, rethought events, so that it was not just this Battle of Hastings in 1066, but a relationship, but for that battle itself was only ever existent as a way of focusing relations between myriad other singularities of life and death, singularities of all the politics that have existed ever since. So each event exists not for itself, but for the way it sets all the others dancing, moving. And one needs to affirm, understand an event not as just this one thing, but as a sequence, a dance of difference that animates all other things. They exist then, not in the middle of themselves, but in the middle for everything else, caught up in the dance of everything else, the way that others are driven to difference. And once you understand that about events, you lose sight of any notion of any single identity, because who or what you are is constantly rethrown, as your past becomes not something simply ingrained once and for all in your mind, in your memory, your unhappy childhood that led you to this, but rather becomes something you can constantly go back, restitch, rework, re-examine from 1,000 different angles, and allow to stand and to be different. For me, postmodernism, being an urban pervert intellectual, was always about freedom and ways you could allow yourself to be free from the own chains of identity that would say, no, I must be a philosopher or bust. I nearly went mad on that one. That turned me rather into a storyteller, endlessly shifting tales and narratives, turning them into different ways to understand the world. It freed me from philosophy, if you like. But I don't think it's done that for most of us. And why would they? The world isn't full of privileged urban perverts like me, who have the ability to sit and philosophize in tunnels. And we are caught very much, or two of the great political movements of our day are caught up in the sheer uncomfortableness for most people of the postmodern position because of its challenge on identity. Most people want to understand themselves as a thing, a soul, a being, something that is and could live again in the afterlife. A consciousness, then, that is somehow unified. Why? I've never actually understood, if I'm honest with you. It's one of my great failings as a human. I don't feel myself to be that, and I kind of get why people do. I think it's comforting. I think it makes people think, well, I'm me, that's it, isn't it? That's what I am. But as I never particularly wanted to be me, I never got that comfort. But assuming that everybody does want to be an identity, which is an observable truth, what then? Postmodernism presents a real challenge to how you think about your identity, and one that has been quite hard for politics to ingest. And yet, once it has ingested, has gutted, destroyed, disfigured the entire way we understand, not just politics, but the entire politics of identity that is caught up within the modern political thing that gets called cultural wars. You'll notice a certain cynicism. So, two of the great political movements of what? It gets called identity politics, but you'll notice that that can't be right, because this is actually about the way you negate identity and where you reinvent it politics. So that thing that gets called wokeism, and that thing that gets called the new fascism. And again, I'm putting cynicism in because I don't really believe in identities on either of these. But you know exactly what I mean. And with the woke world, in spite of being a little bit old for it, I feel terribly close to it when it is thinking about identity as a way of shifting who and what I am. Over the course of a life, you are many sexualities, many gender identities. Some you work out and develop and they become who and what you are, the partners you have, the you allow to be. But they're always in relation to all the others, all the lesser souls that are screaming in the void or just wooing in the background. And that is true for sexuality, but it's also true for gender identity. Do I ever truly feel to be a man? I don't know. It depends on the context. I have no idea what it means. What that means evolves. If I'm pitching a teepee and doing macho things, perhaps I do feel very, very masculine. Perhaps. Perhaps if you insult my muscles or to make me feel fat, I also feel very masculine. But the fat one, have an almost feminine desire to be thin, which is in abeyance at the moment, but can drive me to ruinous anorexia. So if you wanted to insert a gender identity on that, I have no idea what that would mean. The point is, these things are very incandescent. They move all the time. Who and what you are, how you identify with, who you want to sleep with, doesn't need to be fixed. In a wonderful piece of writing, in La Recherche, I think it might be the Soderman, but I don't know La Recherche. I just know this piece very well. Proust argues that one's sexuality is always complicated. You're always both a man and a woman, and heterosexual and homosexual. And strong alliances are made between people who simply have compatible dominant partners, ones that can relate one with the other. And what your gender identity is in a couple shifts and changes as your couple becomes established. It's an evolving, moving thread. And how you are with different people is also moving. It's a mistake to say, I must be me. And as long as the woke agenda is talking about that, I suppose this is very much the plus bit of LGBTQ plus, T plus. I have a huge amount of affinity with it. It just seems to me to be the sensible way of understanding who and what we are. But the minute you say this is my identity, then I'm starting to go, ooh, are you sure? Are you sure you want to be called this pronoun for all of time? I'm perfectly happy to call you what you like, as long as I remember. I'll do my very best to remember as well, because I think it is polite. But if you're going to start to take drugs and change yourself forever, I'm starting to worry about your theory of identity, because you're wanting to burn your identity upon a body that is different. And there's no particular reason you couldn't embrace that difference. Now, I'm going to put a caveat here in. And this is the caveat my generation will always put in at this point. Because I have known over the course of my life quite a few what I would call real transsexuals. So those who are born outside of their body, who've always known they are in the wrong body, that change and are very happy and stay changed, and are caught up in their new female or male identity, and you wouldn't know. It's not a thing. It's not even a thing they'll talk about particularly. It's just a thing that happened and did happen. And that's a distinct extreme. It's an extreme identity. But most of the wokeism argument is much more postmodern than that. I mean, I could allow for that within postmodernity. It is an allowable fact with just an extreme identity, an extreme set of differences that never shift and never change. Okay. It happens. But most of us aren't there. Most of us are always caught in a shifting spectrum, evolving. and actually allowing yourself to evolve, not allowing people to muscle in and say, well, you must be this identity, or allowing them to be confused by saying, but you've changed, you were this and that and this, as if it was a sequence of identities that you were going from one to t'other, is always a mistake. This is not a set of politics of identity. It's the politics of difference and understanding how you can differ from yourself. And the movement within any wokeist movement to assert the one's right to be different identities is, I think, a huge mistake, because it turns it into very confrontationalist, and a confrontation that is actually misplaced and unnecessary, because it gets the confrontation at absolutely the wrong place, and so it cannot resolve well. What is actually happening is the embracing of difference, the evolution, the change of who and what you are, the acceptance that you don't have to be born in the body, that you don't have to simply accept the identity of the body that you're in. Fine, absolutely. But then running to another identity and say, well, I must now be this. And that's just running from Beelzebub to Satan, if you want my opinion. And so on one side, you get a theory of wokeism that is still caught up, in spite of the fact it ought to be driven by difference. It's still caught up within theories of identity. The same is true for ethnic identity, out of interest. To over-identify with any ethnic group is a complicated thing. Now, there are some definitions that are necessary and political and matter. I'm not denying that. So the definition of having African origins, I think, is important. Although what it is to be an American, a descendant of slaves, and what it means to be an African are very distinct things. And this is a mistake to over-confuse them. And so that there are always bubbling complexities, even in groups that will often understand themselves as united in many contexts. But even there, you just have to be careful with the politics. Otherwise, you can easily lose yourself in the maze of identity, the screech to be, and all the bloody politics that follow from it, and not actually understand this in terms of an algebra of difference, of shift and of change. And what do you say of fascism? Well, fascism is the most fascinating version of the extreme nihilist theory of difference. Because, in a sense, in their demand to be this or that, I mean, those identities that Deleuze, bless him, would have thought of as major identities, and therefore very difficult to hold down. So, white, Christian, French or British. So you understand yourself in terms of a majority position. And actually it is true, in a world of difference, where everything is shifting and everything is changing, the majority position loses its necessary easy authority. And how does it respond? And this is, of course, the really interesting bit. In order to defend this notion of identity, it understands itself in the most postmodern of ways, in terms of what it is not. Anything that group that the American MAGA called liberals would be annoyed by, that's their identity. Anything then that irritates, angers, infuriates, perplexes those that are developing theories of difference and the slightly problematic theories of identity within that difference are to be provoked, because it is in that provoking you feel who and what you are. It's a very curious theory. So to become part of the major identity, part of the major power blocks, to feel it in a postmodern world and to feel your specialness, is to feel the way just simply being what you think you are provokes others. But you understand who and what you are in the provocation. So you hold a cage match fight on the White House lawn. It's a beautiful act of nihilism in the end. So it's designed as much to annoy people who are not there as to do anything for those who are there. It is saying, we don't care about about all your tolerance. We don't care about your values. We are what we are, and we are on top. And you've just got to win it. It's an interesting assertion. So you are using the nest of difference, you are using the theory of difference to try to negotiate cultural supremacy. And of course it doesn't work. You can't use Deleuze that way. You can't use postmodernism that way. And so the more you do it, the more you're aware it doesn't work, and the more angry you get, and the more you want to do it, until you end up in this horrible spiral that we're in, of a certain group within the culture who are grooming themselves and driving themselves bonkers, and the very unscrupulous politicians who are genuine nihilists, I mean things like Farage, or for that matter here in France, Bardella, who don't believe a word of what they say. Absolutely not. They're grifters after the champagne and the rich girlfriends. That's the ARN anyway. They're not after anything real and political. But they're the ones prepared to stoke this nihilism of difference, this understanding of a majority position and its necessary power through the politics of provocation, and provocation alone, so that in the upset of others they feel who and what their power actually is. It's a very curious position, but one that in a sense is created the minute you try to start to assert from the majority position identity into a world that has slipped into postmodernism, that has slipped into a world where majority positions don't really exist anymore, where privilege doesn't exist like that anymore, and can't understand itself as natural and God-given. It can only understand itself in the provocation. And so, in this dystopia, we live in the legacy of what my generation bequeathed, the academic legacy, I mean, that adoption of postmodernism and embracing of difference and different ways to be different. But the trouble is, once you pitch that into a world which screams identity, you end up with these weird monsters that we can only understand, and we can only work out how we move on from here by dissolving and moving on, and understanding that actually difference doesn't need identity. Or if it doesn't need identity like this. And such identities in the end will betray us all.